Thank you for being with us. Priority Talk Radio right here on Truth 101 WXJC. Or maybe you're finding us at the podcast. We appreciate you either way. Thanks for being with us here for good news and Christian values. And we are excited to talk about the time of the signs with Barry Stagner, the closeness of Christ's return. And he joins us today. Barry is out in California and is the senior pastor of Calvary Central there in Costa Mesa, California, and also hosts the lineup each week discussing Bible prophecy. Written several books on these topics, including this latest one, The Time of the Signs. And Brother Barry Stagner, it's good to have you with us, sir.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate you having me on.
All right, well, let's let this California guy give us your story, give us your background, tell us what's going on, and then we'll get into some of the book. But let's learn a little bit more about you. Share your testimony with us briefly.
Well, I was raised in a Christian home. Actually, my mom is from Mobile.
Really?
My dad was stationed at Egnan Field in Pensacola.
Yeah.
And I was born 2 months after my family moved back to California, where my dad was originally from. I was raised in a denominational church, and when I was 12 years old, I read a book called The Late Great Planet Earth. And
right.
I like to say it scared the heaven into me, and piqued my interest in Bible prophecy. And it wasn't long after that I gave my life to the Lord, and lived for Him for about 4 years, and then got my head stuck in a whiskey bottle for almost a decade.
Oh, no.
And lived as a prodigal and destroyed my brand new marriage. God thankfully healed us. My wife and I just celebrated our 47th anniversary.
Wow, congratulations.
And very grateful, yes, thank you, for the healing touch of God. And I was at a church out here in California that was evangelistic in nature, and felt the tug of the Lord to move back to Orange County and just see what God was going to do. And home Bible study started, and Calvary Chapel. Originally, we were called Calvary Chapel Tustin, which was a city that we were in, and we had just recently changed our name because where the church was rezoned, and they tore the whole block down, and so we had to move. But
so now it's Calvary Central OC, is that right?
Central Orange County, yeah.
Okay, good.
And I was asked by Pastor Chuck Smith to sit in with him on a program he was doing on internet television, and got to know Pastor Chuck, and really kind of launched my ministry in the realm of prophecy, and have been traveling really for the last 6-7 years with Amir Sarfati from Behold Israel Ministries, and a Messianic Jew, as they are called, and I traveled really all over the world teaching about Bible prophecy. And the Lord just really laid on my heart to take kind of the questions that are often asked about when's this going to happen and when is that going to happen, and look at Jesus' answer to the four apostles' question about what are the signs of His coming in the end of the age, and put them in a chronology as best as possible, with a little bit of calculated speculation in there for things that we don't know hard and fast, and just lay out a timeline of what's going to happen when, what the specifics are, who the countries are involved in the Ezekiel War, when is the destruction of Damascus going to take place, and things of that nature. So that's the story, and I'm sticking with it.
Well, I got you. Yeah, that's wonderful. About how many years ago was that when Chuck Smith sort of invited you in to got this started with you?
That was 2012.
Okay.
And,
so you got to spend a close to a decade, I guess, working with Chuck Smith on some of these issues and stuff. Or did you know him prior to that? How close were you?
Well, I did. I knew him just as a parishioner when I came back to the Lord after my prodigal stint. We attended the church there, and Pastor Chuck was our pastor. And it was when he was advancing in cancer that he, unbeknownst to me, he listened to our radio program every Sunday morning before he taught. And so when it became clear that things were getting harder and harder for him, none of this did I know until after he had passed away. And some of the folks close to him shared with me that he had listened to us every week and wanted me to step in for him when he was gone or unable. And so I got to spend some wonderful time with him, both on doing a prophecy program and then some question and answer stuff on the radio. And just what an incredible man of God, and very, very thankful to have the time that I did with him.
Wow, that is fantastic. Great story. I'm going to ask you just off the record, or not off the record, but off the topic here. You know, the whole Jesus Revolution movie and book and all that. You know, and the story of Greg Laurie, our friends from here in Birmingham, the Irwin brothers. You know, the movie that they produced on that last year. How has that been?
Right.
What kind of splash has that made, or how has that been received there in Orange County and among the Calvary, churches there, in the area, and from someone who knew Chuck Smith so well? Give us your feedback.
Well, the impact was and is significant, as actually when we left Calvary Costa Mesa, we went to move to the city of Riverside, and were a part of Harvest for 11 years.
Okay.
So I went from sitting under Pastor Chuck to sitting under Pastor Greg.
Yeah.
And I taught the college and career ministry there at the church, and I was involved in a multitude of other things, as was my wife. But, there was a baptism not long after the movie was released. And there's some 4,500 people got baptized,
right,
who had committed their lives or recommitted their lives. And the movie had certainly raised awareness, so to speak, about all the things that God did back then. So, yeah, it's had a significant impact. And I've had people tell me at the church, I've watched that 5 times, or especially, well, what, was that really an accurate portrayal of Pastor Chuck? And, so it's been really a significant event, I think. Late in church history, so to speak.
Did you feel it was an accurate portrayal? I mean, you didn't know him. I don't think you didn't know him at that time, but getting to know him later on, did you feel like things were pretty congruent?
Yeah, actually, I was saved during the Jesus movement, but
Okay.
I was raised in a denominational church, and it's kind of funny because I was told that you need to stay away from Calvary Chapel because they're swinging from the chandeliers over there. And then I wind up pastoring at Calvary Chapel and sitting in with Pastor Chuck.
Okay.
And all. But
so
yeah,
you were right there in the middle of it then, yeah.
Well, yeah, I saw the impact, and people at my school were getting saved, and God was moving radically, during the hippie movement and all that. And, so it was as the movie portrayed, and God did just a tremendous work in the hippies and, those who were out there looking for something other than what society was presenting, much like we have today. So it'd be nice to see another Jesus revolution happen here in our country before the Lord comes to get us.
Well, amen. Hey, we can agree on that all the way from Alabama, no doubt about it. Well, that was all parenthetical there. I didn't know I was going to get to ask you those questions as we're getting to know one another. That is really good. Your newest book, The Time of the Signs, but it is following up on your really best-selling Bible prophecy book. So just, tell us, you kind of introduced it, but let's take a minute here and just tell us what you do in the book. I've enjoyed getting into it, and you got a lot of the signs in here. I will say that. That's it, and the timeline as well. Give us an overview. Maybe we can dig into a few topics here in a few minutes.
Well, I think the interesting part about the Olivet Discourse is, there were specific questions that were asked by Peter, Andrew, James, and John, the pairs of fishermen brothers,
right,
among the disciples, and they, Jesus had just told them that, you look at these stones of the temple grounds and mount, and not one will be left upon another. And of course, their curiosity was piqued, and they asked, when are these things going to be, and what will be the signs of your coming and the end of the age? And I thought it's interesting that Jesus never answered that first question. He never answered anything or gave any specifics about, the 70 AD event when Titus would basically have his men disassemble the walls and take them apart to recover the gold from the fire that burned the temple and all the worship implements there. And he skipped over that, and it was purposeful because that had nothing to do with the other two questions. It wasn't a sign of the end of the age, nor the sign of his coming. But then he goes into this magnificent, detailed, specific description of what it's going to be like during the tribulation or prior to it. And that really got me thinking about, one of the things that often pops up, and I like to kind of deal with some of the things that the scoffers will say, and, well, there's always been earthquakes, there's always been rumors of war, there's always been ethnic tensions and pestilence and famine, and all the things Jesus mentioned in Matthew 24:3-8. But he was answering the question that was asked of him. He wasn't just giving a general overview of history. They asked for the signs of his coming and the end of the age, and he mentioned those things specifically, and he closed that section, Matthew 24:3-8, with the statement that these are the beginning of sorrows. And that phrase can be translated as the commencement of birth pangs.
Mm-hmm.
So since the question was about the signs of his coming and the end of the age, that means the answer was about the signs of his coming and the end of the age, and therefore the mention of these naturally recurring events in the course of life in a fallen world are going to have something different about them when it's getting close to the end of the age and as signs of his coming. So, I think this all begins with the rebirth of the nation of Israel. I think the fig tree there in the Olivet Discourse is representative of the nation of Israel. Joel uses the fig tree. Hosea uses the fig tree. Jeremiah even uses a fruitless fig tree as a description of Israel. And so I think, and there are those who would disagree, and I would disagree with them, but I do believe that the end of the age began in earnest on May 14th, 1948, when God began to regather his scattered people, and we began a march toward the heavy labor portion of that commencement of birth pangs, which would be the tribulation.
Well, that is a great overview. Let's get into more of it. Let's take a break. Barry Stagner is our guest from all the way out in Orange County, California, Costa Mesa. The Sign of the Times is his latest book. Barry, the best way for people to get the book from Harvest House, it's a Harvest House publication, is what, Amazon?
Amazon, any online bookseller, Amazon seems to be, the main resource these days.
Right.
And, I would appreciate it if, your audience would advance purchase it, because that helps get the exposure up, not only on Amazon, but it also gets stores like Target and Walmart to take a look at it, because when pre-sale numbers are strong, they'll actually put it on the shelf. And my hope is this book will get into the hands of non-believers.
That's right.
So they can see
and the release date. The release date is not until after the first of the year, January 16th. So there is time. There is time to do that, to pre-purchase and go ahead and get that lined up, and you'll have a good read come after the first of the year. And I bet if they pre-order, they might even get it a little earlier than January 16th. Would that be correct?
Well, it's possible.
Yeah, they might get it to you a few days earlier. Yeah, they might get it to you a few days earlier if you pre-buy it. The Time of the Signs, Barry Stagner. Let's take a break, come back on the other side, and we'll continue this conversation as we talk prophecy, Bible prophecy here on Priority Talk. Stay with us. We return and continue our conversation with Barry Stagner. He is a excellent pastor and author. Numerous books, and his latest, it'll be out in January, as you heard us telling you. You can pre-order it now, The Time of the Signs, following up on his prior work, Bible Prophecy, The Essentials, and that was a Publishers Weekly top 10 bestseller. And this is a real guide to understanding the signs, the indicators that Christ's return is imminent. Barry, you talked about the rebirth of Israel in 1948. I've been right there, in Tel Aviv at the, in the room where where they launched all that from, their independence and the birth of the nation. I'm sure you've been there as well. And you're somewhere special. That began, you believe, as I really do too. That was when God began to regather his people together, that really did kind of set this in motion, this time in motion. You mentioned Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse, and of course, Barry, I've always thought it was very interesting that he was on the Mount of Olives, and the disciples asked him these questions. He was in the very place where Zechariah had predicted that the Messiah would stand when he came to establish his kingdom. And here he was answering these questions about just that very topic right on the Mount of Olives. I just, nothing, no small detail gets past the Lord's providence, does it?
No, absolutely not. It's the only book that you can teach for 30 or 40 years and still learn. I mean, there's nothing like it. Just see these little subtle nuances like you mentioned. They're just makes it a really, truly living and powerful book like it claims to be.
Well, and he told them, as you said, no, don't be so worried about the date, but being prepared. And so let's do that as well. So you give a timeline really here in the book. That's kind of what the book's about, and you do, as you said, make some educated, I guess, ideas about what some of these things are that maybe we're not 100% about. But this may be a basic question, but what is next on this timeline? We're talking 1948. We see all the things going on in the world right now. Anytime Israel's at war, you got to really start kind of counting the cost. What's next on the prophetic timeline?
Yeah, I think we always have to be ready for the glorious appearing of our great God and Savior Jesus Christ to take us to where he is, as he promised that he would do. And, the rapture, as it's often described, as an imminent doctrine. We should always be ready for that. And I think there's a couple of things to point out. And one, there are things that are related to the nation of Israel, because we are living in a time, for the first time, where the church and national Israel are coexisting on the planet. We are moving toward the 70th week of Daniel, which I believe requires the removal of the church in order for it to begin, because after all, in Daniel 9, we're told these 77s, or periods of 7 years, are determined for Daniel's people in the holy city. And 69 have been fulfilled. One is yet to come. And the church, I believe, out of necessity, has to be taken out of the way. One, for the lawless one to be revealed, and the other things associated with his reign of terror to happen. Now, with that said, I believe that it is possible that we could see the destruction of Damascus as reported in Isaiah 17:1, or recorded in Isaiah 17:1. Last night there were assaults on Damascus by Israel, and so Damascus is constantly in the news. And we deal with some of the questions that popped up. Some say in 689 BC, Sennacherib fulfilled Isaiah 17:1, but the existence of Damascus pretty much refutes that particular theory, because Damascus brags about being the world's oldest continually inhabited city, having a continuous history of some 4,500 years. So the fact that Damascus is still here leaves that standalone prophecy in Isaiah 17:1 hanging out there. So I believe that what we could see next is the destruction of Damascus, which could then lead to emboldening the invading nations of the Ezekiel War scenario to have that hook in the jaw, draw them down from the north, and see the beginning of the Ezekiel War. Now, the interesting thing about that is here we've got the named players under their ancient names, and geographic markers you can find
Yep.
through the study of historians like Herodotus and others who have identified where the descendants of Noah in Genesis 10 settled. So we know, we obviously know who Persia is. It's the Iranians.
Mm-hmm.
We know that Ethiopia, that's mentioned in some translations, in antiquity, Ethiopia was known as the region just south of Egypt, and that's Sudan. Libya is named by name, and then you've got, of course, a series of names that the descendants of Noah settled in the area known as modern-day Turkey. So Turkey's a definite player. And then Rosh, it was popularized by C.I. Schofield that Magog was Russia, but I think better scholarship today has shown that to be in error, and it's part of Turkey. Magog is actually part of Turkey. By definition, Magog is the mountainous region between Cappadocia and Media, and that's Turkey without question. Cappadocia is in Turkey today. It's an existing city. So,
well, I think what you're saying is very interesting, because I do believe a lot of people see Russia as being involved in this. Or are you saying that they're not involved as Magog?
So I'm saying that
that's
not Magog.
Yeah, not Magog. I got you. Okay.
Right, and there's some. As a matter of fact, it's interesting that you brought that up, because Rosh is widely believed today to represent Russia. So they are involved in the scenario. But the interesting thing about that is the King James translates Rosh as a noun and not a proper name. So it talks about Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, which is Turkey, and does not assign to it a proper name status. So, there are some who say that the invading nations are 4 in number and not 5, including Russia. But then you've got the New King James and many other modern translations that translate Rosh as a proper name representing Russia. So either way, you've got all the players of the Ezekiel war scenario now in coalition together, 4 of the 5 having a shared ideology, religious ideology, and that being radical Islam.
Yeah. Let's name them off again. Iran, Sudan,
Libya, Turkey, and Russia.
Okay. Yeah, and you're
right.
But
they all, if you want to add
4 of the 5 are
they,
radical Islamists. You're right. Yeah.
Right, and then if you add Russia, the shared feature between them is they are energy-producing countries, petroleum and natural gas products. So they do have that shared element, which would make Russia. Russia's 60% of their gross domestic product is energy products. So that makes them a major player. And what they can't afford is for Israel's natural gas that's already making its way down to Egypt to be liquefied and shipped into the European markets. What they can't afford is what competition would do, and that's drive down prices. So, whether Russia's involved or not, all the nations named in the Ezekiel war scenario are operating together. 3 of the nations have military personnel and hardware on the northern border of Israel, the very direction that God's going to bring them down from. Now, the other interesting thing about the Ezekiel war scenario is how it ends. And it ends with divine wrath. God destroys these invading nations, leaves these invading forces dead on the mountains of Israel. It takes 7 months to bury the dead, and they burn the weapons for 7 years. And the interesting part about that is that particular type of divine response seems to be limited to the tribulation period, or at least after the rapture, when God begins to deal specifically with them. So I believe that the possible timeline is the destruction of Damascus causes the start of the Ezekiel war scenario. But I do believe that it is most likely that the Ezekiel war ends after the rapture of the church, because it's an act of God's wrath that brings it to an end. And we don't, thankfully, as born-again Christians, have an appointment with God's wrath. So
I'm on the same page with you on that, and I know not everyone is, and that's fine. These are definitely
true.
Secondary issues. No one's salvation's at issue here. It's just all of us trying to trying to figure it out to the best we can to
Yeah,
understand.
nobody's saved by their eschatology.
That's a great way to say it. I love that. But as we see the what could be the Ezekiel war approaching, now you're saying this could get started prior to the rapture. I mean, in some ways, I guess, could people even say it's already started, so to speak, according to how you define war, but as we see it approaching, you've got to know that the rapture of the church, if you subscribe to the rapture of the church, is very close, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think if we're seeing precursors to events that will be fulfilled during the tribulation, then we need to be eyes up, focused on the upward call of God, and living each day as though it very possibly could be the last before we're taken up and run out of our opportunities to share Christ with those around us.
And I think that's the message: is be prepared.
Yes.
More than getting caught up in all the details. I mean, people like Barry are experts in this, and there's and they can teach us a lot. But more even worried about being knowing everything is be prepared, and then you can try to know everything.
Yeah, Greg, I think that's so important, and that's really my heart in this and for this book, and the one I wrote together with Amir, Bible Prophecy, The Essentials, and every conference that I speak at. My goal and hope for the outcome of that event is that we would have a desperation for lost souls, and that our boldness would increase as the shortness of the hour becomes more and more evident, and that we'd be out there telling people about Jesus and letting them know there's a way to escape all these things that are coming upon the world. I mean, that's really the heart of this book, and just these conferences we do.
Well, it certainly is. Let's take a break and come back with a few more questions on the other side with Barry Stagner. If you've got time, Barry, do you have a few more moments?
I do, absolutely.
Okay, well, let's take a break. We'll come back with Barry Stagner, author of the book. It'll be out in January. So you need to get this one on your radar, The Time of the Signs. It'll be out in January of 24, and so you're going to want to check it out. All right, let's take this break, and we'll come back on the other side. Greg Davis here with you, Priority Talk Radio, and we continue with a few more moments with author and pastor Barry Stagner. His latest book, it'll be released in January of 24. Go ahead and pre-order now. If you're hearing this prior to that time, go ahead and make the order and get the book, The Time of the Signs. And, of course, his previous work, Bible Prophecy, The Essentials, and has written there with Amir Sarfati. And you guys just got a great collaborative work as well together. You mentioned him earlier. How close are you guys working together now?
Well, Amir, we do stuff online regularly. Mm-hmm. We'll be doing some things in 2024. This past year was an extensive travel year. We basically traveled from July, he and I and the rest of the Behold Israel team, from July through most of October, doing conferences in Australia, New Zealand.
Wow.
We started the year in the Philippines in January, and then I took a break and didn't travel. I hear J. Vernon McGee's voice in my head, don't be a stranger in your own pulpit. So I didn't want to be gone too much, but the church and the board, they see what God has done, and they're behind it and supportive. But I still want to make sure that I'm there as much as possible. So I took a break between end of January through July, and then we were in Australia, New Zealand, Montreal, Philadelphia, Dallas, a host of other places. So, but
did you guys make it to the? Did you make it to the Southeast?
No, we didn't. We were in Philly. Actually,
Dallas.
When the October 7th thing happened.
Oh, yeah.
And but that was kind of the end of our tour for the year. But we basically go wherever there's an invitation, and I do things separate on my own. And but he's going to take a travel hiatus or a travel sabbatical in 2024, It was kind of interesting because he said a few months ago, he said, I just feel like something ominous is coming and I need to be home and stay home. And then boom, here we are in Philly, and the October 7th event happened. So, but I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he's coming to Washington in a week or so to talk to some of our congressmen about what's going on in Israel, or congresspersons, I guess, talk about what's going on in Israel, and to rally the U.S. Congress to stand with Israel and make sure that all the things that have happened in past administrations continue, at least those favorable to Israel. So
absolutely. Okay, well, very, very interesting. I'm glad to hear a little bit more of the big picture. So you guys have been together all year long. You kept talking about the conferences, and so that was you guys were together. Well, you've been traveling the world. I was in Israel in July, so obviously October 7th hit very close to home with me, just a couple of months removed from having been there, and for multiple times, but was just there in July. So these current events around the world, we mentioned them a little bit earlier, but just continue to talk more and more about how this is. I guess if you were sounds like the Bible conferences, the prophecy conference ended about the time all of this broke out. I guess it would have changed the sessions up just a little bit because you'd have had a lot more current events to try to tie in, correct?
Well, because the conference in Philadelphia was the day that it happened. The conference was on October 7th.
Yep.
And, it was, we rearranged the schedule for the day because Amir was really having a time and trying to communicate and get a hold of family and just make sure he knew where everybody was, and friends and coworkers and all that. So
my friend did the same thing. My friend who is a dual citizen, but leads guides and tours and over in Israel. He was actually here as well, and was scheduled to go back a day or two later. So he was going through the same exact thing. All of the Israelis that were whether they were there or here. Boy, it was really a chaotic situation, a scary time.
Yeah, it took him about 10 days to get home, and just no flights.
Right.
Everything was canceled, and the whole scenario that played out. But, Greg, it's interesting. I get the question all the time about, is this prophetic? And I think one important thing for us to remember is that, the tribulation period is a relatively short span of time. And so a lot of the things that are going to be fulfilled during the tribulation need to be in line before the tribulation actually begins, like the technology for the whole world watching the two witnesses rise from the dead and ascend into heaven, or the mechanics of having global commerce monitored by a single entity, so to speak, or governmental power. All of that has to be in place. The tribulation isn't long enough for that to develop. And I think what we're seeing in what's been going on around the world right now is in preparation for the man of sin to rise to power, and eventually the Zechariah 12 verse 3 prophecy being fulfilled, where the whole world gathered in unison against Jerusalem. And, watching what's happened with these protests around the world, and thank the Lord there were some 290,000 people on the mall in Washington this past week in support of Israel. But if you look at the grand scale of things around the world, that pales by far in comparison to the number of people who are condemning Israel. And it's just an incredible thing to see how quickly this happened. And it always takes my mind to what Jesus said in the opening verse of Revelation, that the things that were being shown to John were things that must shortly take place. And that Greek word translated as shortly means to happen in quick succession.
Right.
Closer together, like birth pangs for a pregnant woman, more intense, more frequent, and really the whole world changed in a day. and the anti-Semitism simply exploded around the world. And I believe this is feeding into that mentality during the tribulation, this violation of proportionality that so many are fixated on today, that, if there were 1,400 Israelis killed or Jews killed, then there shouldn't be more than that with the Palestinians. And
right.
Just this whole thinking that's just so bizarre, but it feeds into the mentality of the tribulation.
Well, the interesting thing about the
gather against the Jews.
That's the birth pangs. You talk about it in the book. Is once the birthing pangs begin, once that commences with a lady, it's not irreversible. It's not reversible. In other words, it's moving forward at that point. Correct?
Oh, absolutely. There's no stopping it once it starts in earnest. And we've seen stops and starts throughout the course of history, especially the recent history since Israel became a nation again. I always liken them to Braxton Hicks contractions,
right,
or false labor, so to speak. And, we've seen, I remember when back in 91, when Kuwait was invaded, and the churches, they were instantly packed, people sitting in the aisles, and the church just all of a sudden exploded. And I remember thinking back then, if this dies down and doesn't continue to advance the prophetic narrative, people are going to lose interest and walk away. And here we have a generation now where, like Paul prophesied in 2 Timothy 4, that sound doctrine is not endured, and fables or fabrications are preferred over truth. And this is part of the prophetic scenario as well, that all feeds into where the world is headed mentally and spiritually in these last days.
Well, certainly. We have been visiting with Barry Stagner and just having a great conversation here. If you just joined us, we've been talking for a little while this hour, and you can go back and find that on our podcast if you want to hear the earlier parts of the conversation. He's written multiple books on these topics, and the latest, The Time of the Signs, it'll be out in January of 24. So if you're hearing this prior, you can certainly pre-order the book. Would love for you to do that. That helps get it more attention, get it on more shelves, and make it more prominent so more people will find it, including people who don't know the Lord. And this is a salvation issue for them. Those of us who already know the Lord, we can debate over some of the finer points of prophecy. We'll all find out at the same time who was right and who was wrong. But for people that don't know the Lord, they need a book like yours, Barry, and that's your heart behind it, right?
Absolutely. I like to tell people at conferences and at the church, we are living around people who are going to go into the Great Tribulation. And we are the only ones who know the specifics and details, and to a degree the chronology of things that are going to happen at that time. And we have to be vocal about those things.
Do you think of your books and your teachings, and you along with Amir Sarfati and Behold Israel? Do you often think that there'll be people reading these and watching these videos one day after we're not here, trying to figure this thing out?
Well, I sure hope so, and I'd like to encourage people to remember the effectiveness of preaching that judgment is coming. Look at what happened with Jonah. He didn't want to see God move amongst the wicked Assyrians, and he didn't want to go preach in their capital city. And yet when he preached that very brief message, 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown, there was a national great awakening.
The greatest awakening of all time. Of all time.
That's right. That's right. And, I've found it interesting, if you see in Revelation the fulfillment of the gospel being preached to the whole world, I believe that actually happens by an angel flying in the high point in the sky, preaching the everlasting gospel. And it's identified as the everlasting gospel, but the message content is fear God and give him glory, for the hour of his judgment has come. So there's a place for us to be bold about the fact that, hey, the world is wrapping up, and there is a time of judgment coming, and they may laugh at us and scorn us and mock us right now, but when details that we shared with them about what's coming begin to happen right before their eyes, hopefully that will lead them to investigate the rest of what we believe, and that is that whosoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved.
Well, amen. It won't be it won't be easy to do during those days. You'll have to go endure great persecution, but it is possible, and there will be those who do that. And so, books and teachings like yours, and hearing radio broadcasts like this that are still out there, certainly one day will still lead people to Christ. Well, Barry, a great visit. I have enjoyed getting to know you and getting into the pre-release of the book. You've got a really good way of sharing things very simply and succinctly, and I appreciate that. You know, people's attention spans are not what they maybe once were, and you know, you're able to take a lot of these complex things and you really make them really simple. I think, can it really be that simple? But you really do have a good gift at that, and I appreciate you sharing it with us.
Well, thank you, Greg. I appreciate that. Again, McGee, put the cookies on the bottom shelf so the kids can get them.
Well, and you do it. You do it speaking, and you do it in the book as well. So again, we want to encourage people, be aware of the book, and if you're looking for something to get into after the first of the year to try to understand what's going on in the world and the time of the signs, I think this book would be outstanding for you. So we do hope that you'll check that out. It'll be available everywhere books are sold, and you can pre-order it now. Head over to Amazon or anywhere books are sold, and get that pre-ordered, and you'll get it in January, and you'll be set to go. And then you can go back and listen to this interview again and sort of try to piece a lot of things together with it. Barry, thank you for your time, my friend, and we would certainly look forward and value having you back on again at a point in the future.
Would love to.
As well. So the Times of the Signs, Barry Stagner has been our guest. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Greg.
God bless you.